Like and subscribe for more videos. Some years ago, Couchsurfing was still a new thing and I, early 20s at the time, was a very active user on the platform. I stayed with many hosts as traveler but also frequently hosted Couchsurfers in the little 2-bedroom apartment I shared with an amazing roommate in a small university town. I didn't get too many requests but all reviews were positive. What's important to notice, Couchsurfers were sleeping with me in the same room on an inflatable mattress. Of course, I would always vet hosts and guests before accepting or sending requests, trying to filter out weirdos and creeps. My system seemed to work. Fast forward to the last person I ever hosted. I had spent the night in another city with a group of friends. We had gone to a concert, slept at a friend's house, and took a train back home the next morning. We were all visibly hungover, wearing sweatpants and no makeup. In my country, the train ticket is cheapest if you travel in a group of 5. An incentive to not use the car. So, waiting in front of the ticket machine to find more people to share the ticket with was very common. We were 3 broke students, and happy to add 2 more people. During the train ride, I started to chat with one of the guys on our ticket, a traveler with a tent and a huge backpack who is not connected to the other person on our ticket. This backpacker told me he was from New Zealand, in his early 30s, probably a lie. He looked older, and had been traveling through Europe for the past 8 months with no plan of going back anytime soon. We ended up chatting a little bit about travel, philosophy, cultural differences, etc. throughout the train ride. Nothing out of the ordinary. I mentioned that I had a boyfriend, a long-distance relationship, very early on in the conversation. This will be important for later. After a while, this guy came up with Couchsurfing and asked if I was familiar with the concept. Being the proud Couchsurfing veteran I started listing all the people I'd ever hosted and all the places I'd ever stayed at. He bluntly asked me if I would be able to host him for a couple of nights because he was interested in my student town. I was a little hesitant at first, but I guess my brain was not functioning properly to tell him no directly. I called my roommate to ask if she would be home and whether she was okay with a guest. She didn't mind and I told him I could host him for this night only because I had stuff for the university to finish the next day, which was true. First and easiest chance to avoid this creep, missed. The train arrived, we went home to drop our stuff off, and proceeded with a quick tour through the old town. Bear in mind, I was still hungover, and hadn't had time to take a rest. He didn't seem too interested in the city tour and asked me if we could go shopping instead. We ended up in H&M, where he bought a t-shirt and some underwear. He kept asking me for my opinion on color and style before buying. A little strange but fair enough. Afterward, he tagged along when I went grocery shopping for dinner, where I also bought 2 bottles of wine. While still out, he asked if he could stay longer but I declined. Overall, he made me feel a little uncomfortable, but I brushed it off, telling myself it was only one night and he would be gone by tomorrow. There goes my second chance to give him the boot. At home, he took a shower that lasted well over an hour. I really thought he was trying to drown himself in there. When he finally came out of the bathroom that had turned into a steam room, he was wearing his new t-shirt and also the underwear, which I would find out later. In the meantime, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and my roommate had arrived home. He then lounged in my room charging his phone and using my computer to look up where he wanted to go next. This was before smartphones were widely used. When I went back to my room, I casually asked him for his profile on Couchsurfing, the reason why he was sitting in this very room. He casually replied that he had deleted his account a while ago. What the fuck? Why would a person backpacking through Europe delete their account? It didn't make any sense, and in hindsight, I should have kicked him out then and there. No further questions asked. But it was already evening and I wrongfully felt like I had to be a good host until the next morning. Big mistake, and third chance missed. Dinner was fine overall. We ate and shared a bottle of wine in 3. My roommate, however, couldn't stay with us for longer because she worked in the hospital and had to wake up really early. Couchsurfer creep stayed seated at the table and reminded me that I had bought another bottle of wine, which should be open now. I politely told him that I was done drinking for the night, but if he wanted, I could open the second bottle for him alone. I thought he would decline, but I was wrong, obviously. He proceeded to drink half of the second bottle, and once he noticed my liquor collection, he tried to convince me to do shots with him. I gave him the same reply as before and he went for 2 or 3 shots while I was watching him. The quality of the conversation downspin rapidly, and I said I would stay in the kitchen for a little bit to do the dishes/work for the university, and invited him to relax in my room in the meantime. I was seriously not in the mood for dishes/work, but figured it would be better than talking to him. This plan didn't work out because he kept bouncing back and forth between kitchen and room, trying to strike a conversation again. I was not very interested though, and eventually, he gave up and went to sleep around midnight. Once I heard him snoring, I went to bed as well. All good, you might think? Far from it. During the night, I had a weird sensation. It felt like something on my mattress was moving. I later found out that the guy had reached over from his mattress to pull on one corner of my bed sheets in an attempt to wake me up. At night, however, I wasn't aware of this yet, but it kept me drifting in and out of sleep. Around 4 a.m., the Couchsurfer decided to go to the bathroom. Once he came back, instead of going back to his bed, he stood at the end of mine, staring at me for several minutes while I was wide awake but pretended to be asleep. At this point, I freaked out internally and was cursing myself for my naivety on the train. Eventually, he went back to his bed but immediately started whispering repeatedly, "Are you awake?" I figured I had to answer. I pretended to have just woken up and asked in an annoyed voice what he wanted. He replied, "Well, I woke up and I have a lot of energy in me, and I want to use it up." I asked why he was telling me this. He said, "Well, I know you have a boyfriend, but it's really difficult as a guy to travel alone for such a long time." I just told him that this wasn't my problem, jumped out of bed and went to the kitchen. No way was I going to stay with him in the same room after he admitted to wanting to use up his energy. He followed me to the kitchen and asked why I was no longer in bed. I answered that I didn't feel comfortable with him in the same room anymore and would like him to leave as early as possible. He pointed at the t-shirt and underwear he was wearing and said, "I only bought those for you and spent $30 for nothing. Thanks for the effort, I guess." I simply shrugged and opened my laptop to distract myself. Instead of packing his stuff and leaving immediately, he was restlessly bouncing between the kitchen, bathroom, and my room doing a series of weird things. The top 3 of those were washing his hands and face at least 10 times in a row, filling a glass with water, circling it around, and pouring it back into the sink repeatedly with the water running from the tap, and when I asked him what the fuck he was doing, he came awfully close to me, looking me into the eyes intensely, saying, "Some things from the childhood, they remain. And you can never go back and can't change them." While he said that, he looked like the male version of this crazy girlfriend meme. This last thing really freaked me out, but thankfully, that was the time my roommate woke up and entered the scene. I quickly filled her in about the night's events, in a language the guy didn't speak. Finally, he got the message that there wouldn't be any energy use-up time, and started packing. My guest eventually grabbed all of his stuff, turned around to look at a picture of my boyfriend, and sighed and said, "He's a lucky guy." But before finally going out of the door, he asked me for my number. My initial thought was to shout at him what he was thinking, but I figured since he already knew where I lived, this additional information wouldn't make a difference but might make him leave. I reluctantly gave him my number, and he immediately tried to ring me. Once he saw it was really my number, he visibly relaxed and was out of the door. The whole ordeal, from watching me sleep to leaving, lasted around 2 hours. He was completely mental but thankfully not violent. The cherry on the top was when the creep called me a week later. I hadn't saved his number, and after he had said his name, I just asked if he was that crazy couch surfer who woke me up at dawn requesting sex, told him to never call again, and hung up. He sent me a text message saying, "You are the crazy one." And this was the last I heard of him, and the last time I hosted a couch surfer in my apartment. Creepy couch surfer. Let's not meet again. My neighbor is one of those annoying, wannabe YouTube personalities. Over the years, I've seen him cough out cinnamon, lay flat on the hood of his car as it slowly creeps down the driveway, and douse himself in lukewarm water, all the while screaming epic win, epic fails, or fuck, epic maintenance of the status quo for all I know. It can get tiring to watch him go about his shenanigans in the pursuit of viral fame. So, when he knocked on my door the other day, told me he was going away for a few weeks, and asked that I get his mail, honestly, it was a relief. I can't explain the peace of mind I had, knowing I didn't have to brace myself for any of his stupidity for a while. I was always afraid his stunts would wind up bleeding over into my life. Things were pretty normal for the first couple of days. He received a few bills, a bit of spam, and what I could only assume was a birthday card. Then, one evening, I got home to find a cardboard box waiting on his front porch. In big red letters was written, "Return to sender." I'm no small fry, but I admit I had trouble lifting the box on my own. It was really freaking heavy. Lugging it across the road to my house was even harder, and I quickly realized there was no way I was going to drag it up the stairs and through my front door. I decided I'd leave his package in my garage. It wasn't like I kept my car in there. The garage door was a piece of shit that refused to open without a good thug and a whack. It was less trouble just leaving the car in the driveway than it was to fight with the garage door every morning and night. In hindsight, I should have set the package down while I struggled to open the tricky door. But you know how it is when you've got a good grip on something. No point in setting it down if you don't have to. It was as I kicked the door for the third time that I lost my grip on the package, and it fell to the ground. I heard a slight crack inside. Shit, I cursed. I hoped I hadn't broken anything important, but figured I just wouldn't tell my neighbor about it and let him assume the break happened en route. Hands-free, I finally managed to get the garage door unstuck, and boy did it screech in protest as it rolled up and over me. I dragged the box the rest of the way, setting it in the corner for whenever my neighbor would come back to claim it. And then, I forgot all about it. Until a few days passed, that is. I'm not sure exactly how long it took for the smell to waft in from the crack under the garage to house door, but it came in slow progression. It was a sickly sweet odor similar to a skunk, and for the first few days, after I smelled it, I genuinely assumed that's exactly what it was. Roadkill that had left its mark on my house. It was only when I realized the scent was growing more intense instead of fading that I went looking for a source. That's when I opened the garage door, and that's when the odor knocked me back, holding my nose. The culprit wasn't hard to identify. The only change in my garage was the box in the corner. I remember thinking it must have been one of those meat of the month subscription boxes. The meat must have gone rancid from being left out of the fridge for so long. How much meat could have been in there for the box to have been so large and heavy? An entire freaking cow? I covered my nose as I approached the box, a pair of scissors in my hands. I probably wouldn't have needed them to open it, as it had become soggy enough at the bottom to poke through with a finger, but I wasn't about to poke my finger into spoiled meat juices. That soggy bottom was the reason I had to open the box in the first place. If I tried to drag it out whole, everything would spill onto the floor. I was going to have to dump the pieces of meat one garbage bag at a time, and take them down to the dumpster, a process I wasn't looking forward to. My scissors tore through the tape, along the top of the cardboard box. I thought the smell couldn't get any worse, but as I flipped the flaps open, I discovered a whole new gamut of stink. It was like opening a burning oven, but instead of a heat wave, I was met with waves of piss, shit, and putrefaction. It was so bad that I staggered back and had to force down the puke begging to guzzle out of me. I don't think I could have handled that scent mingling with the horrors coming out of the box. I'm not ashamed to admit I ran out the door for a breath of fresh air, but in the short time I'd spent in the garage, the smell had become so ingrained in the fabric of my clothes that it clung to me like a shadow. Nothing I tried could keep the smell out of my nostrils. Not air fresheners, not a face mask, not 3 showers, and a change of clothes. Every second that box lay open in my garage was another second the smell was allowed a foothold into my home. I had to bite the bullet. I returned to the garage, the flaps of the box still open as though inviting me to look. I was prepared, a clothespin pinning my nostrils shut, a garbage bag in one hand, the strongest cleaner I could find in the other, and long rubber gloves to keep my skin from having to touch what was inside. But, as it turns out, I needed none of those things. I wouldn't have to touch or clean the contents of that box. I would only have to suffer the nightmares every night. You see, there was meat in that box, but it didn't come from a cow or a pig. No, it was worse than that. It was my neighbor. Dead. Still in one piece, but dead. I called the cops, and naturally, they took me in for interrogation. It's kind of hard not to suspect the man with a corpse in his garage, after all. Thankfully, they soon realized I wasn't involved. My DNA might have been all over that box, the smell might have left a mark throughout my house, but there was one piece of irrefutable evidence in my neighbor's own hands that proved my innocence. A vlogging camera. They showed me the footage only once. I'm not sure if they were allowed to, or if they felt so bad for me they figured it couldn't hurt. Either way, I saw it. My neighbor was sitting in the box outside of a shipping facility, laughing as he told the world how he was going to mail himself across state lines. He brought pee bottles, food, a pillow, and a few flashlights. His friend, a guy I'd seen at his place several times, to help with his stunts, closed the lid and presumably dropped him off for shipment. Throughout the next couple of hours, or days, I'm honestly not sure, my neighbor recorded a few short clips about his progress. I think I'm in a truck now, I can feel it moving, must be in a warehouse. Pretty warm here. Still got plenty of food, that kind of stuff. And then, on the last entry, the box toppled over. He broke his neck, and that was it. The camera recorded until either the memory card got too full, or the battery died. There's one thing I didn't tell the police after they showed me the video. One thing I heard in the footage that will haunt me to the day I die. Just after the tumble that broke his neck, I heard the familiar screeching sound of my garage door.